It's been a long time since my last video, but welcome back everyone to the first official Mythfall Devlog. As you can see from the title, our game finally has a name, so if you want to try it, I'm constantly updating and re-releasing it to mythfall.com, where you can play it directly in your browser, and if you don't want to make an account, you can play as a guest, but none of your progress will be saved. A lot has changed since the last devlog, so much so that I think I'll start fresh and give the current state of the game. Mythfall is a cooperative multiplayer roguelike where you fight monsters, get loot, and then craft better gear so you can fight harder and more interesting monsters. I'm hoping to explore this concept in more forms, but right now the main form of fighting monsters is by going into dungeons, clearing rooms, and hopefully progressing to the final boss room. Mythfall also has permadeath like most roguelikes, so if you die you lose your character and all of your gear, though there's a handy bank where you can stash a few items that you won't lose in case you die. I think this sort of permadeath offers a lot of interesting risk and reward gameplay opportunities. You have to decide what you're willing to risk to beat a dungeon, or if you're not feeling confident, you might try a few times with some old gear that you don't care about. Because the game is multiplayer, I've spent a good deal of time trying to make sure that the game is built in a scalable way so that multiple people can fight in a dungeon. I'm hoping that dungeons will eventually be able to support upwards of 100 players at a time. Right now, my $6 server can support around 100 players in the overworld, but I think eventually I'll be able to get that number a bit higher with some careful optimizations, or just from buying bigger servers. If you've ever played Realm of the Mad God, then you no doubt notice some parallels between it and Mythfall. I'm building a different game with different mechanics, but I will say that a lot of the inspiration for my game does come from Realm of the Mad God. I think Realm was a cool game when it came out, but I still feel like there's some interesting ideas that have yet to be explored. Right now, when you spawn into Mythfall, you're greeted by a few NPCs. One of them is the apothecary who will craft potions if you bring him the right ingredients. The others give you a few helpful hints on where you might go to find some adventure. And this guy, I'm pretty sure he just wants to work out. Currently there's 3 dungeons available, each with different monsters, drop tables, and bosses. The easiest is the Pirate Cove, which is 1 level deep. The second easiest is the Ancient Forest, which has 3 levels. In the forest, you can get a key drop from killing bosses that lets you activate and enter the most difficult dungeon, which I called the Pits, but I think I might rename it to something different in the future. I like the idea of gating difficult content behind accomplishments. That way you've always got a little reward waiting for you when you do something hard. It also adds some extra motivation to keep progressing through the harder content. The game is still missing some juice and special effects, but I was able to add some music and sound effects to the majority of actions. Right now the music is just randomly selected, but I'll eventually change it to be event-based so that you can have some intense music during a boss fight. The most difficult part about adding music was the fact that music files are absolutely enormous. I started by embedding my soundtrack files directly in my game, but quickly realized that nobody's going to wait for an 80 megabyte download just to play a browser game. So I built an asset loader which can dynamically load assets. That way the game can stay in its 4 megabyte form and I can download music when it's needed, rather than all at once. At one point, so many projectiles spawned that my game would freeze for over a second trying to play all the sound effects. So I decided to limit the maximum number of sound effects to 5, which gives a pretty close approximation. Right now the entire progression system is based around getting better items. My goal is to create a large number of build variety, which involves a lot of items and modifiers. So for that, I have different weapon types. There's also a bunch of equipable armors, rings, and hats, some of which also change your appearance from stealthy ninja to yeah. I'm not 100% sure if I'll keep all of these, so added 4 different secondary abilities: a healing aura, an explosion spell, a lifesteal spell, and a barrier spell. There's a few important features which, if we didn't have, would make the game basically unplayable for multiple players. The first is HP scaling, which will dynamically scale monster health based on the number of nearby players. Right now, every monster has a base health, which gets scaled by the number of extra players in the room. Currently, I'm scaling it by 50%, so if there's 5 people in the same room, the monster will scale its health to the base health plus 4 times 50% of the monster's base health. The scaling factor and methodology will likely change, but it's a good start, and I'd prefer to change it once I have a bit more data in the future. The next important multiplayer feature is soulbound drops. This is basically just a way to guarantee that nobody can steal your loot when you get a drop. How it works is that if you do a certain percentage of the total damage to a monster, you become eligible for a drop. Everyone who is eligible for a drop will roll the drop table and get their own loot bag. The reason for this threshold is that we need a way to incentivize people to help out in the boss fight. You shouldn't be able to just stand in a corner and still get a drop. So the more people that are in a dungeon, the more you have to fight for damage percentages to secure your drop. I've also thought about scaling the drop chance based on the total damage dealt. So basically the more damage you deal, the better odds you have at getting a drop. I might do that in the future, but right now it's not in the game. On the technical side, tracking damage isn't too difficult. I basically just have every monster maintain a damage counter for everyone who's damaged them. Then every time they take damage, they simply increment that player's damage in the list. I changed rooms to have one-way barriers that let you enter but not leave the room. I think this makes combat much more interesting because you have to enter and fight inside the room rather than just constantly kiting backwards down a hallway. It also prevents people from just running through the rooms and skipping the fights altogether. I might make some dungeons less room-based in the future, just to add a little bit of variety to combat encounters, but right now all of them are room-based. I also changed recalls to be channeled, so instead of instantly recalling to town when you press the recall key, you have to hold it down and not move for a few seconds. I'm hoping this adds a bit more thinking for players who have to decide if they have enough health and health potions to make it through the next encounter. Well, that's all I have for this week. As always, an absolutely massive thank you to all the supporters on YouTube, GitHub, and Patreon. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.